By the end of the first week, the official search was scaled down. By the end of the month, it was suspended entirely. Evan Mercer was declared missing under unexplained circumstances. No body, no note, no witnesses who saw him leave the forest. Only a pair of shoes, placed as if someone wanted them to be found. And a question that would haunt Merrow Glen long after the searchlights faded. Did Evan Mercer walk into the forest planning never to come back? Or did something inside Blackwood Forest decide that for him? The official search for Evan Mercer began at 1:26 p.m., less than 7 hours after the trail camera captured him stepping into Blackwood Forest. By then, the forest had already changed. Rain from the previous night had softened the ground. Wind moved through the canopy in uneven waves, masking sound and erasing traces. What little evidence might have existed at dawn was already dissolving into mud and leaf litter. Still, the response was immediate and extensive. Local police established a command post at the Ridge Path trailhead. Forest rangers mapped out grid zones. Volunteer groups, neighbors, co-workers, parents from the soccer league arrived in reflective vests, carrying thermoses and quiet determination. Everyone believed the same thing: Evan had gotten lost, or hurt, or confused. They believed he was still alive. Search dogs were deployed first. The handlers were experienced, confident. They started at Evan's car, then followed the scent line into the trees. For nearly half a mile, the dogs moved steadily, noses low, tails alert. Then, abruptly they stopped. Not circled. Not wandered. Stopped. The handlers noted the moment in their logs, using language that would later be quoted again and again. Scent terminates without degradation. In simpler terms, Evan's trail didn't fade, it ended. One handler suggested Evan might have doubled back. Another suggested he'd been picked up by someone. A third said nothing at all, just stared at the ground longer than necessary. As daylight faded, floodlights were brought in. Helicopters scanned from above, their blades scattering leaves and sound. Volunteers shouted Evan's name into the dark, listening for a response that never came. Inside the forest, sound behaved strangely. Voices seemed swallowed. Radios crackled, then went quiet. Even the dogs grew restless as night fell. By the second day, the search expanded deeper, into areas rarely mapped, where trails dissolved into uneven ground and old logging paths ended without warning. Rangers warned volunteers to stay within marked zones, but not everyone listened. That was when the first inconsistencies appeared. A jogger named Tara Klein came forward, saying she'd seen Evan around 7:10 a.m., farther down Ridge Path than investigators believed he'd reached. She described him as standing still, like he was waiting for someone. But phone records placed Tara miles away at that time. Her phone connected to a different tower entirely. She insisted she was mistaken about the time, not the man. Another witness, a retired park guide named Ronald Pike, claimed he'd heard voices arguing near the inner trails around mid-morning. He couldn't say what was said, only that one voice sounded urgent. Later, he revised his statement, saying he wasn't sure it was arguing, maybe just hikers talking loudly. The revision came after a second interview. Then there were the timelines. Evan's phone had last pinged at 6:49 a.m., yet a ranger's log showed a brief radio transmission interference near Sector C at 7:03. It wasn't unusual, but it was noted. The interference lasted 12 seconds. No source identified. By the third day, fatigue set in. Volunteers were rotated out. The forest grew quieter. And then the shoes were found. They were located at 9:17 a.m. on day 3, nearly a mile off the main trail, near the base of a cedar tree older than the town itself. The volunteer who found them initially thought they were trashed, discarded footwear left by campers, until he noticed how they were arranged. The shoes were clean. Not spotless, but cleaner than the surrounding ground. They sat parallel, toes pointing east, heels aligned. The laces were loosened but not undone, tucked neatly inside as if to prevent tripping. Inside each shoe was a sock. Dry. Searchers marked the spot and called it in. When investigators arrived, they noted something else. There were no footprints leading away from the shoes, and none leading toward them either. Forensic analysts would later describe the placement as deliberate. Not staged in a theatrical sense, but purposeful. Someone had taken time. Someone had cared enough to arrange them. One expert compared it to how people leave shoes at the edge of sacred spaces, not as evidence, but as transition. That comparison was not included in the official report. The ground around the cedar tree was examined inch by inch. No blood. No torn fabric. No phone. No sign Evan had fallen or been dragged. Just the shoes. Lena was brought to the site later that afternoon. She identified them immediately. She also pointed out something others had missed. Evan always tied his laces in a double knot. These were single-knotted or had been untied carefully. She said it quietly, almost to herself. Search teams widened the perimeter again. Days passed. Rain returned. Temperatures dropped further. And still nothing. As the investigation deepened, attention shifted from the forest to the people around Evan. Co-workers were interviewed. Friends. Family members. Everyone agreed on the same thing. Evan had been tired lately. Distracted. But not depressed. Not reckless. Not the type to vanish. Then a colleague mentioned something small. 2 weeks before the disappearance, Evan had asked about unused vacation time. Not requested it, just asked how much he had left. He'd never done that before. Another coworker recalled Evan clearing out old files on his computer late one evening, staying well past closing time. IT logs confirmed large deletions around 8:40 p.m. the night before he disappeared. When asked about it, the coworker shrugged. He said he was just cleaning up. But investigators noticed something else. Evan's personal email account had been accessed at 5:11 a.m. the morning he vanished from a location not consistent with his home IP. That access lasted less than 2 minutes. The message history was empty. Then there was Daniel Reeves, a part-time forest ranger assigned to Blackwood's outer trails. Daniel told police he'd passed Ridge Path trailhead that morning around 6:45 a.m. and hadn't seen Evan's car. The problem was, surveillance footage from the gas station showed Daniel's truck parked there at 6:10 a.m., with Evan inside the store. When questioned again, Daniel adjusted his timeline. Said he must have been mistaken. Said the days blurred together during busy season. He avoided eye contact when he said it. Investigators didn't accuse him of anything. Not officially. But his name stayed in the file. By the end of the second week, search efforts slowed. The forest was too large. Resources were limited. Hope, though not spoken aloud, was thinning. Then a discovery reframed everything. A volunteer reviewing drone footage noticed a brief anomaly near the inner ravine, a flash of reflective material. When teams returned to the area, they found it wasn't clothing or gear. It was a laminated trail map. Folded. Dry. Placed beneath a rock. The map belonged to Evan. His fingerprints were on it. So were partial prints that did not match anyone in his family. The map was marked not heavily, but deliberately. A faint circle drawn around a point deeper in the forest, far beyond the shoes. A place no casual runner would go. A place Evan had no reason to know existed. When Lena was shown the map, she didn't cry. She didn't ask questions. She just said, he knew where he was going. And for the first time since the search began, investigators considered a possibility they had quietly avoided. That Evan Mercer did not get lost. That he walked into Blackwood Forest knowing he would not return or knowing someone else was waiting to make sure of it. For the first 2 weeks after Evan Mercer vanished, investigators focused on the forest, its paths, its silence, its capacity to conceal. By the third week, the forest had stopped yielding anything new. So they turned, finally, to Evan himself. What they found was not a second life or a dramatic secret. It was something quieter, more unsettling. Evan Mercer had been unraveling, carefully. It began with his work records. A deeper forensic review of his office computer revealed that the files he deleted the night before his disappearance weren't random clutter. They were client folders he had managed personally for years. Tax histories, audit notes, internal emails, all legal, all routine, except for one thing. Each deleted folder corresponded to the same 12-month period, 4 years earlier. When investigators asked the firm's compliance officer about that year, she hesitated. Then she said something she would later regret saying so plainly, "That was a bad year." 4 years earlier, Evan had been assigned to a small portfolio of private clients tied to a regional development project, land purchases, zoning shifts, shell companies. Nothing overtly criminal, but complex enough that oversight was minimal. The kind of work where details slipped through cracks. The firm had been audited not long after. The audit found nothing actionable. The case was closed. Evan never spoke about it again. Until now. After his disappearance, Lena found a notebook hidden behind old tax manuals in their home office. It wasn't a diary. There were no confessions. Just dates, initials, and questions written in Evan's careful handwriting. Why me? Who else knows? If it comes out. The sentences trailed off. Pages were torn out near the end. Lena said she'd never seen the notebook before. Investigators also pulled Evan's phone records more aggressively this time. The phone itself was still missing, but metadata told its own story. In the 6 weeks before he vanished, Evan had received multiple calls from a prepaid number. Short calls. Never longer than 90 seconds. Always early morning or late evening. The number was unregistered. Evan never returned the calls. Except once. At 5:03 a.m. on the morning he disappeared. That call lasted 47 seconds. Cell tower data placed Evan at home during the call. The other caller's location could not be determined precisely, only that it was routed through a tower near Blackwood Forest. That detail shifted the investigation. Because Evan hadn't just gone into the forest. Someone from the forest had reached out to him first. Investigators revisited the gas station footage. They slowed it down, enhanced the audio. That was when they noticed Evan wasn't alone for the entire visit. Another man entered the store 12 seconds after Evan. Taller. Baseball cap pulled low. He didn't interact with Evan directly. No visible exchange, but he stood close. Too close for coincidence. They exited separately. The man was never identified. Then there was the trail map. The marked location, the circled point beyond the shoes, had a name. Locals rarely used it. Rangers did. Stonecut Ravine. A narrow, unstable stretch of land where old quarry work had collapsed decades earlier. The area was considered hazardous and unofficially discouraged. Not forbidden, but avoided. Search teams had skirted its edges early on. No one wanted volunteers near loose rock and sudden drops. But Evan had marked it deliberately. And someone else seemed to know he had. When investigators finally authorized a focused search of Stonecut Ravine, they found something unexpected. Not a body. Not evidence of a fall. They found a campsite. It wasn't recent. The fire pit was cold, scattered with leaves. But it was intentional. Stones arranged carefully, a flattened patch of ground where someone had slept. Buried beneath loose soil nearby, they uncovered remnants of food packaging and a water filter. The items were dated, manufactured more than a year before Evan disappeared. This wasn't a spontaneous stop. Someone had been there before. Recently enough to prepare. Long enough to plan. Fingerprints were lifted from the packaging. Partial matches came back inconclusive. Not Evan's. Not Lena's. And then the most unsettling find, a laminated photograph, sealed in plastic, tucked beneath a rock at the edge of the ravine. It showed Evan Mercer. Taken from a distance. Evan was standing in his driveway, loading his car. The timestamp placed the photo 3 days before his disappearance. Evan did not know he was being photographed. The discovery fractured the prevailing theories. Evan wasn't just walking away from his life. He was being watched. Investigators returned to Daniel Reeves, the part-time ranger whose timeline never quite held. This time, they brought the photograph. Daniel stared at it longer than expected. Then he said something no one had asked him. "I told him not to come." The room went quiet. Daniel claimed he'd met Evan months earlier, during a routine patrol. Evan had asked questions, not about trails, but about restricted zones. About areas where phones lost signal. About how long it would take to walk from Stonecut Ravine to the old service road on the far side of the preserve. Daniel said he thought it was odd, but not illegal. Later, Evan reached out again. Asked about the ravine specifically. Daniel claimed he refused to help after that. "I told him it wasn't safe," Daniel said. I told him people don't go in there unless they don't want to be found. The implication hung in the air. But when pressed, Daniel denied any further contact. Phone records contradicted him. His number matched one of the prepaid calls Evan had received. Daniel said someone else must have used his phone. Investigators weren't convinced. As the pieces shifted, so did the narrative. Evan was no longer just a missing man. He was a man caught in something older than the forest and closer than anyone realized. Lena, when told about the photograph, asked a single question: did he look scared? No one answered. A forensic psychologist reviewing the case offered a different perspective. Evan's actions, file deletions, careful planning, the shoes, suggested not panic, but control. A desire to manage how he disappeared. But control didn't mean choice. Sometimes, the psychologist said, people disappear not to escape life, but to contain damage. To protect others. To stop something from spreading. That idea reframed everything. The shoes were no longer abandonment. They were punctuation. The forest wasn't the destination. It was the boundary. And then, a final detail surfaced, one that collapsed the remaining assumptions. A sealed court document, filed 2 days after Evan disappeared, was discovered during a routine records review. It was an emergency injunction, requested anonymously, blocking the release of financial documents tied to the development project from 4 years earlier. The injunction cited credible risk to human safety. The judge had approved it without public explanation. The filer's identity was protected, but the language mirrored phrases found in Evan's notebook. The timing was precise. Too precise. Evan Mercer disappeared on a Friday morning. On Monday, the case went quiet. By the end of that week, the project was officially dissolved. Whatever Evan knew, whatever he was involved in, ended with him, which left investigators facing a new, unsettling possibility. Evan Mercer didn't vanish because he was lost. He vanished because the truth was. And someone, maybe Evan himself, made sure it stayed buried. The forest had not taken him. It had been chosen. And with that realization, the investigation didn't move closer to an answer. It moved somewhere else entirely. By the time the investigation entered its 9th month, no one used the word search anymore. They called it a review. The forest had given all it was going to give. The ravine was logged, mapped, scanned. Dogs had run the trails so many times they no longer pulled at their leashes. Weather cycles had erased whatever fragile traces might once have existed. Winter had folded the ground inward. Spring had rearranged it again. Blackwood Forest looked unchanged to anyone who didn't know what to look for, which meant it looked innocent. The official report, when it finally arrived, was thick but cautious. Every sentence leaned away from certainty. Words like likely, suggests, cannot be ruled out appeared more often than facts. What could be stated plainly fit on one page. Evan Mercer entered Blackwood Forest alone on the morning of April 14th. His shoes were found later that day, placed neatly at the edge of trail marker 6. No body was ever recovered. Everything else lived in footnotes. The task force assembled 3 dominant theories. None of them closed the case. Each of them left something behind. The first theory was the one the public found easiest to accept. That Evan intended to disappear. Investigators cited the deleted files, the notebook, the prepaid calls, the careful placement of the shoes. The campsite near Stonecut Ravine suggested preparation. The photograph proved surveillance, but not necessarily threat. Evan may have known he was being watched. He may have decided that vanishing, completely, was the only way to prevent something worse. In this version of events, Evan walked past the shoes and continued deeper, avoiding marked trails, using ranger knowledge he wasn't supposed to have. The forest, dense and uneven, would swallow a man who knew how to let it. No struggle. No accident. Just intention. The problem with that theory was practical. No confirmed exit. Even someone experienced would have left something behind eventually. A fiber. A footprint. A mistake. And Evan had been meticulous, but not infallible. The second theory leaned in the opposite direction. That Evan never planned to disappear at all. In this telling, the shoes weren't a message. They were misdirection. Investigators noted that the shoes showed no signs of extended walking. The soles were clean. Too clean. Evan hadn't worn them deep into the forest, he had carried them. Which meant the moment they were placed was not the moment he vanished. Someone else could have arranged them. Someone who understood symbolism. Someone who wanted the disappearance framed a certain way. The prepaid calls. The ranger. The photograph. The campsite that predated Evan's arrival. In this version, Evan went into the forest to meet someone. He believed it would end a problem. He believed he would return. The forest didn't take him. Someone used it. But there was no evidence of violence. No blood. No disturbed ground. And no one ever proved a second person was present that morning. Which led to the third theory. The one investigators discussed quietly, late, when the recorders were off. That the truth was fragmented. That Evan intended something, but not everything that followed. Perhaps he planned to disappear temporarily. Long enough to stop a release of information. Long enough to force someone else's hand. The injunction filed after his disappearance suggested leverage. But leverage cuts both ways. If Evan underestimated who else was involved, or how far they were willing to go, then the forest became a contingency. A place where plans unraveled. In that version, Evan didn't die immediately. He didn't vanish cleanly. He went where signals died and help didn't come, trusting preparation that failed him. The forest doesn't need intent. It only needs time. The case stalled there, suspended between theories that refused to resolve. Eventually, it was administratively closed. Missing person, presumed deceased, the final status read. No press conference announced it. No one wanted to explain why a man could vanish so completely without leaving a body behind. Lena received the notice by mail. She read it once. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the same drawer where Evan used to keep spare keys. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in months. Grief had turned procedural, something she carried out in small, private motions. She returned to work part-time. She stopped correcting people when they used past tense. Some nights, she dreamed of shoes lined up at the edge of things, doors, sidewalks, beds. Always empty. Always waiting. Evan's parents visited the forest once. They stood near trail marker 6 and said very little. His father asked whether the marker had always been there. A ranger said yes. His mother touched the bark of a nearby tree, as if checking whether it was real. They left without entering the trail. The ranger who had spoken to Evan, Daniel Reeves, resigned 3 months after the case closed. No charges were filed. His phone records were never fully reconciled, but suspicion alone was not enough to hold him. He moved north. Or west. Accounts varied. The campsite at Stonecut Ravine was dismantled. The laminated photograph disappeared into evidence storage. The injunction expired quietly when the development project dissolved completely. The shell companies folded. The land reverted to state control. No one reopened the audit. The truth, whatever it was, no longer had momentum. Years passed. Hikers still reported odd feelings near the ravine. Not fear, exactly, but the sense of stepping into a place that expected something of them. Rangers dismissed it as terrain psychology. Narrow spaces. Echoing rock. Sometimes, boots were found abandoned elsewhere in the forest. Usually it was nothing. Lost gear, careless hikers. Every time, protocol required a check. Every time, the forest gave nothing back. The shoes Evan wore were eventually returned to Lena. Cleaned. Bagged. Labeled. She kept them in their original box. On the inside lid, in Evan's handwriting, was a note she had forgotten about, written years earlier when he first bought them. For walking things through. She didn't know if it meant anything. She didn't know if it ever had. The case remains cited in training materials as an example of controlled ambiguity. A disappearance that resists narrative. Investigators are taught not to force meaning where none can be proven. But forests don't resist narrative. They absorb it. Somewhere beyond trail marker 6, beyond the point where paths stop pretending to lead somewhere, the ground still holds the shape of choices made and unmade. The forest does not explain them. It does not correct assumptions. It simply keeps what enters. and gives back only what it once remembered. At 6:47 a.m. on October 12, 2018, a motion-activated trail camera at the northern edge of Blackwood Forest Preserve captured a single still image: a man in a gray hoodie stepping past the wooden trail marker labeled Ridge Path, 3.2 miles. At 6:49 a.m., his phone last pinged a nearby cell tower. After that, there was nothing. The man was Evan Mercer, age 39. An accountant, a husband, a father of one. Someone whose life, by every measurable standard, followed a predictable rhythm, and then, without warning, broke it. Evan lived in the town of Merrow Glen, the kind of place where people waved from porches and complained about the same 3 potholes every year. He worked at the same mid-sized accounting firm for 11 years. He coached his daughter's junior soccer team on Saturdays. He bought groceries every Thursday night at exactly 7:15 p.m., according to loyalty card records that investigators would later pull. There was nothing dramatic about Evan Mercer. That was the point. He woke up at 5:30 a.m. every weekday. Black coffee. Toast he rarely finished. He left the house by 6:20, always early, always calm. His wife, Lena, would later tell police that he had never once missed work without calling ahead. Not when he had the flu. Not when their daughter was born. Not even the morning his father died. So when Evan walked into Blackwood Forest that Friday morning, no one thought to worry. Blackwood Forest sat just outside town, thick, old, and largely untouched. Locals used the outer trails for jogging or dog walking, but few ventured deeper than the marked paths. The forest had a reputation, not for danger, exactly, but for weight. Sound behaved differently there. Time felt slower. Even the light seemed reluctant to move. Evan had been there before. Not often, but enough to know where the trails began and where they ended. The morning he disappeared, he did not tell anyone he was going. At 5:42 a.m., Evan sent a single text to his wife. "Running early today. Back tonight." It was an odd message. He never went running in the mornings. He hated mornings. Lena noticed the wording immediately, running early instead of leaving early. She considered texting back to ask what he meant. She didn't. That moment would return to her again and again. Security footage from a gas station 2 miles from the forest showed Evan at 6:18 a.m., buying a bottle of water and nothing else. He paid in cash, which was unusual. He declined a receipt. The clerk remembered him later because he seemed distracted, polite, but distant, like he was listening to something no one else could hear. At 6:31 a.m., Evan's car pulled into the gravel lot at Ridge Path trailhead. The car was parked carefully, perfectly within the lines. The engine was cold when police arrived later that day. Inside the car, his wallet, keys, and phone charger. The phone itself was gone. What stood out most, though, was what he wore. Evan was not dressed for a hike. He had on running shoes, old ones with worn soles and frayed laces, but no jacket despite the October cold. No backpack. No extra water. No map. Just the hoodie, thin gloves, and jeans. According to the weather report, temperatures inside the forest that morning hovered just above freezing. If Evan had planned to be gone long, he was unprepared. If he hadn't planned to be gone at all, then why go in? Those questions would circle the investigation from the beginning, never quite landing. When Evan didn't show up at work by 8 a.m., his supervisor called Lena, expecting a simple explanation. Overslept. Flat tire. Dead phone. By 9:12 a.m., Lena was in the car, driving toward Blackwood Forest, her chest tight with a feeling she couldn't name. She found his car exactly where the footage showed it would be. By noon, the police were involved. Search and rescue teams arrived by mid-afternoon. Dogs were brought in. Drones flew overhead. The forest, vast and quiet, absorbed them all without response. There were no signs of a struggle. No broken branches. No disturbed soil. The dogs followed Evan's scent from the trailhead for just under half a mile, then stopped. It was as if he had simply ceased. Searchers noted how abruptly the scent trail ended. No signs of backtracking. No deviation. Just forward movement, and then nothing. By nightfall, temperatures dropped. Rain began to fall. Still, there was no Evan Mercer. The search expanded over the next 2 days. Volunteers from town joined in. Forest rangers combed deeper paths rarely used. Every potential exit point was checked. Nothing. On the third morning, a volunteer named Marcus Hale found the shoes. They were Evan's running shoes. Lena recognized them immediately. They were placed side by side at the base of a cedar tree, laces neatly tucked inside. The socks were still in them. No footprints leading away. No footprints leading toward. Just the shoes. The location was troubling for reasons that weren't immediately obvious. The spot was nearly a mile off the main trail, but not far enough to be accidental. It wasn't hidden, but it wasn't obvious either. A place you'd only reach if you were going somewhere specific. Searchers marked the area and widened the perimeter. They found nothing else. No blood. No clothing. No phone. Just the shoes. Investigators would later argue over what the placement meant. Some called it symbolic. Others said it was practical. Perhaps Evan needed to cross water, or his feet hurt. A few insisted it was meaningless coincidence. But no one could explain why a man would remove his shoes, leave them behind so carefully, and continue into a freezing forest barefoot. Lena stood behind the police tape, staring at the ground where her husband's shoes had been found, and said only one thing. He wouldn't do that. As the days passed, theories began to form. Accident. Mental break. Voluntary disappearance. Each theory brought more questions than answers. Why take the phone but leave the wallet? Why cash at the gas station? Why that trail on that morning? Why the shoes? The forest gave nothing back.